Dark secrets, mind control, and shocking experiments. The US government has done some disturbing things. But the CIA's human tests were the worst, ruining lives and even sparking a drug craze, all for an edge in war. The birth of culture, a war on the mind. In the early days of the Cold War, the CIA became obsessed with the idea that enemy nations, particularly the Soviet Union and China, had discovered a way to brainwash people. Some US officials believed communists had perfected a secret mind control technique, a method so powerful that it could turn anyone into a loyal follower and even force them to betray their country. There was almost no proof to support these fears, but in the 1950s, the mere possibility of such a weapon was enough to justify drastic measures. If the Soviets were rumored to have a new tool, real or not, the US had to beat them to it. And so, Culture was born, a secret CIA program designed to uncover the ultimate method of mind control. The goal was to develop techniques that could make prisoners reveal secrets against their will, erase people's memories to cover up covert missions, and even brainwash individuals into committing assassinations without remembering who gave the order. It sounded like something straight out of a sci-fi novel, but for the CIA, this was serious business, and they were willing to go to disturbing lengths to achieve it. The man who led this dark and dangerous project was Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist working for the CIA. On the surface, he didn't look like a villain. He was soft-spoken, with a background in pharmaceuticals. But behind closed doors, he was a mad scientist with a license to experiment on human beings. Gottlieb had a radical theory. To control the human mind, you first had to completely destroy it. Only after wiping away a person's identity and thoughts could you reprogram them with new beliefs. His methods to achieve this were extreme: torture, drugs, and psychological abuse. Under his leadership, culture crossed every ethical line imaginable. Prisoners, mental patients, and even everyday civilians were used as test subjects, many without their knowledge. For over a decade, culture operated in complete secrecy. But by the mid-1960s, rumors of the horrific experiments began to spread. The CIA panicked. In 1973, the agency ordered the destruction of all culture documents. Thousands of files were shredded, erasing most of the evidence. Only a handful of surviving records and whistleblower testimonies revealed the full horror of what had happened. The CIA didn't just experiment in secret laboratories. It carried out its tests in hospitals, prisons, and even in research foundations that were made up on the spot. People were given a new medication without being told what it was for. As one infamous victim later revealed, even notorious figures like Boston mobster Whitey Bulger were tricked into taking these drugs. After all, no one would volunteer if they were told, "Take this pill so we can destroy your brain and try to control you." The LSD experiment. How the CIA unleashed a drug craze. One of Gottlieb's wildest ideas involved LSD, a powerful hallucinogenic drug that had recently been discovered in a Swiss lab. The effects of LSD were still poorly understood, but some believed it could unlock the mind's deepest secrets, or completely shatter it. Gottlieb was fascinated. If LSD could alter reality, perhaps it could be used to erase memories, rewire thoughts, or turn people into programmable agents. But he needed a massive supply for testing. Convinced that this drug could be the key to mind control, the CIA bought every ounce of LSD in the world. The agency spent $240,000, around $2.8 million today, to purchase the entire global supply of the drug. The goal was simple: dose as many people as possible and study the results. What followed was one of the most reckless experiments in history. CIA agents secretly drugged prisoners, hospital patients, and even their own colleagues with LSD, often without their knowledge or consent. In some cases, people were locked in rooms and given LSD nonstop for weeks, just to see what would happen. Some never recovered from the experience, suffering from permanent psychological damage. Gottlieb even set up fake brothels, codenamed Operation Midnight Climax, where unsuspecting men were lured in, drugged with LSD, and observed from behind one-way mirrors. The idea was to see how the drug affected people in a real-world setting. Despite all of this, culture ultimately failed to create a mind control drug. but it did accidentally introduce LSD to American culture, helping spark the psychedelic movement of the 1960s. The CIA didn't just experiment in secret laboratories. It carried out its tests in hospitals, prisons, and even in research foundations that were made up on the spot. People were given a new medication without being told what it was for. As one infamous victim later revealed, even notorious figures like Boston mobster Whitey Bulger were tricked into taking these drugs. After all, no one would volunteer if they were told, "Take this pill so we can destroy your brain and try to control you." Bulger was deceived into believing that this experimental substance could cure schizophrenia. He agreed to take it and ended up ingesting LSD every day for over a year, a pace that would raise eyebrows even among the most devoted partygoers. The aim wasn't to discover an accidental side effect. It was to see if long-term LSD use could completely destroy someone's brain. Once Bulger realized he was merely a government lab rat, he refused to take part any longer. If a hardened criminal in federal prison can finally say enough, it shows just how far this experiment had gone. Targeting foreigners, the new testing grounds. You might think MKUltra sounds almost fun when you hear about artists and even mobsters taking LSD, but that light-hearted view quickly fades. As the experiment went on, the CIA took an even darker turn. They drew inspiration from the human experiments conducted during World War II by Japan and Nazi Germany. The CIA even hired former concentration camp workers, torturers, and vivisectionists to teach them their gruesome techniques. At Fort Detrick in Maryland, these former enemy operatives gave lectures on everything from how mescaline affects the brain to how long it takes for sarin gas to kill. In the 1950s, the CIA started using foreigners for its experiments because the public didn't care much about them. After all, they were seen as former enemies who even spoke differently. The agency set up secret detention centers in places like Germany, Japan, and the Philippines, where the US had strong influence. Local governments were too weak or controlled to speak out if these experiments were exposed. The CIA rounded up enemy agents or anyone suspected of being one, and used these prisoners as test subjects. Once in the foreign detention centers, subjects didn't just receive LSD and endure a few bad trips. The CIA pushed them to the extreme. Agents in these centers could use a mix of known and experimental drugs, along with methods like sensory isolation, electroshock, and extreme hot and cold temperatures, all to see if they could completely break a person's mind. They even added constant questioning to try to shatter a person's sense of self, making the whole process a form of torture. Despite these brutal methods, Gottlieb and his team kept experimenting, driven by their desperate wish to outdo their communist rivals. In 1977, a joint Senate hearing began to reveal the dark side of MKUltra. Although Gottlieb had destroyed most of the records, about 20,000 documents survived due to simple filing mistakes and were later found by Admiral Stansfield Turner. In 1974, an investigation by the New York Times exposed more of the illegal activities behind MKUltra, leading to further inquiries by Senator Frank Church and Vice President Nelson Rockefeller in 1975. Overall, the CIA spent about $20 million over more than 20 years, involving researchers from over 30 universities, to run these experiments. One tragic case was that of Frank Olson, a biochemist who was secretly given LSD in 1953. Olson later jumped from a window during a psychotic episode, and while some family members believe he was murdered after learning the truth about MKUltra, his death was officially blamed on the project's dangerous practices. This grim chapter in history shows how the CIA's unchecked experiments not only broke lives but also pushed the boundaries of what any government should be allowed to do, all in the name of fighting an enemy that may or may not have even had a similar technology. With little regard for patient safety and a total refusal to act responsibly, many more people likely died because of these experiments. Their names and stories may forever remain unknown, hidden in the dark corners of government secrets. Project Stargate, exploring psychic powers. While MKUltra often grabs headlines, fewer people know about Project Stargate. Taking place mostly during the 1970s and 80s, this experiment focused on mind control, but in a very different way. During this era, belief in psychic powers and extrasensory perception was at its peak. Think of it as a time when psychics were everywhere, and even TV shows featured people like Uri Geller bending spoons with their minds. In 1972, a secret report claimed that the Soviet Union was spending millions on researching ESP and psychokinesis. Naturally, the US couldn't risk falling behind. So, the CIA began studying a particular psychic ability known as remote viewing. This meant testing if certain people could see distant places, events, or people without being there. Imagine trying to gather intelligence without ever leaving your chair. It might not sound as thrilling as a spy movie, but it was a serious mission for the agency. The project involved a small team, a chief, 3 remote viewers, an intelligence technician, and a secretary. Participants even had to sign a long consent form warning them about potential risks. Over time, the project went through several name changes, from Stargate to Grill Flame, and even names like Gondola Wish, Sunstreak, and Scan8, each hinting at the bizarre nature of the work. After years of research, with many mixed and inconclusive results, the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, eventually handed the project back to the CIA in the mid-1990s. Brutal experimentation in the War on Terror. In the aftermath of 9/11, a new chapter of CIA experiments emerged, one that would go down as one of the most brutal and ethically disturbing in modern history. Officially framed as efforts to refine enhanced interrogation techniques, these experiments were, in reality, a systematic program of torture. The Physicians on Human Rights condemned the program, describing it as an experimental program based on untested and unproven theories. The techniques employed were crude, inhumane, and designed not to extract truthful information in a humane manner, but rather to break down a person entirely. Under the guise of national security, the CIA implemented methods that pushed the boundaries of what anyone would consider acceptable treatment of human beings. Practices such as waterboarding, sleep deprivation, sensory overload, and extreme physical and psychological stress were used extensively. These techniques were intended to dismantle a subject's mental and emotional resistance, essentially resetting their state of mind. However, instead of yielding reliable intelligence, they often resulted in severe trauma, long-lasting psychological damage, and in some cases, even death. Much like its predecessor projects, these post-9/11 experiments were shrouded in deep secrecy. High-ranking officials maintained tight control over the flow of information, and legal oversight was minimal or entirely absent. This lack of accountability allowed the agency to operate in a moral and ethical vacuum where the protection of human rights was completely sidelined. The secrecy surrounding these experiments not only prevented public scrutiny, but also made it exceedingly difficult for survivors to obtain justice or even have their voices heard. The brutality of these techniques was compounded by the fact that they were often justified on the basis of an urgent, existential threat. In the heightened climate of fear and uncertainty that followed the terrorist attacks, the need to prevent future attacks was used to rationalize extreme measures. Yet, the human cost was staggering. Many victims of these enhanced interrogation methods suffered from chronic mental health issues, physical injuries, and a loss of dignity that can never be fully repaired. Torture as an experiment, the hidden war on detainees. Many people don't realize that the brutal torture inflicted on prisoners abroad during the War on Terror wasn't just about extracting information, it was also treated like a human experiment. The idea was to see how extreme torture methods could break down a person's mind and body. Even though torture had long been seen as an unreliable way to gain intelligence, with the CIA itself having once called it counterproductive, a few officials and contract psychologists, like James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, pushed the unsupported theory that a mix of physical and psychological abuse could break detainees and force them to reveal secrets. If you found this information eye-opening, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden truths.